I'm joined by Dan Ye. He's the CEO of CollegeNode. Welcome back to the show.
How are you, Rachelle?
Good, thank you. So let's start with what triggered this anti-996 movement and how these companies are reacting.
Well, it triggered when a tired, underpaid tech employee began to complain about how tired and underpaid he is. And to his surprise, he found tens and hundreds of other tech employees in similar situation. So this really began a movement, whereas they realized that this is not an isolated case, but the industry are asking its employees to put in hours without paying them.
And there are some very notable companies on this list. Have they reacted, or have any of the laws and regulations really kept up in terms of the sort of demands that you get from the tech sector?
Well, you know, the demand of the tech sector is very studious. And this is not just in China, in tech sectors all over the world. So typically when a company is very small, when Alibaba or JD just started, there's an unwritten contract between the company and the employee in which you put in the time, and the stock option you get will make you a millionaire and retire in 5-10 years' time. Now, this formula works when the company is growing exponentially. However, companies such as JD and Alibaba are already huge behemoths, and they could no longer sustain the 100% growth rate that they had when they were smaller. So this informal contract breaks down when the stock price no longer, grows by triple digits. So many of the workers will begin to push back to this 996, working schedule when you do not pay them for overtime. And all of these employees should be paid for overtime,
right.
But they're not. So it's kind of within a legal gray spot in which they technically volunteer their time, or
right. But as you're mentioning, it certainly seems to pay off better if you're coming in at the ground floor at one of these very fast-growing companies like Alibaba. Now let's also look at this anti-996 license. It says that a company must comply with the laws of the countries where it's registered, where it operates, or where its employees are physically located, whichever laws are more strict. But how realistic is implementing something like this?
So that's what I meant when it's in a technical, legal gray spot, because what constitutes as work, right? So in Japan, for example, going out for drinking after work is actually work, even though technically it's just socializing. Whereas
it doesn't sound too bad. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of relationships are smooth over while you're drinking, and in China, if your project is not done and you go home, you might get fired the second day. They might say, you're just not a really good fit for our company culture. So as a result, people feel peer pressured into putting, 996 or even more time. And, it's not a coincidence that a lot of tech companies are founded by people in their 20s. Now, these are single young men and young women who's capable of putting in these type of hours. But, Alibaba has been around for close to 2 decades.
Right.
And when their employees are in their 30s and 40s, and they want to go home to their families to have dinner. So again, this is when the informal contract breaks down.
And we saw that according to MyMy, which is the Chinese equivalent of LinkedIn, that they're saying essentially a lot of these perks, things like the manicures, some of these spa days that companies offer, it really isn't enough to make employees want to stay if they feel overworked. Their study found that the average tech worker in Silicon Valley lasts about 3.65 years, and that at private Chinese tech firms, that number is about 2.6 years. So how does some of this worker burnout not just impact health, but a company's bottom line?
So when a worker is burned out, one of the things you typically see is that they cease to effectively communicate with their supervisors. And to have a dynamic company, the innovation process does not just go top down. A lot of innovation goes bottom up. So for example, Gmail was invented by a Google employee during his free time. So when an employee is too tired, you lose a lot of internal innovation, which can slow the company down. So this is not just hurting the employee physically and psychologically, but this stifles company innovation, which make the company less competitive. So these tech companies have to find equilibrium in which can encourage the employee to work, but don't send them to the ICU.
Right. So if you had to give a quick message to companies as to a good way to try and strike that balance, or really recognize the importance of rest and recovery as well, what would that be?
I would say to talk to the employee. So if you look at the posting on GitHub, a lot of employees are very frustrated because the management do not listen to them. The management have a goal, and they push their employee as hard as they can to reach that goal without listening to the situation on the ground. So I think, especially for large companies such as Alibaba, with hundreds of thousands of employees, listening to your employee is generally a good practice.
All right, thank you. Lots of good tips there. Dan Ye, CEO of CollegeNode.